and start the introduction again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 10th in our academic series hosted by Campaign Lab. Today, Isolde will be talking about AI and AI fact-checking. Just as a brief reminder, we are recording this event. You'll be able to watch it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel later on. It'll be included in our blog as well. Maybe about 2 weeks, in a week or two's time, we'll send that out. Just a reminder of the structure. Isolde will give a presentation. We'll have a Q&A afterwards. And after that, I'll launch a quick survey just to see how we're all doing. And then as a reminder for the next academic series, on the 9th of December, we'll be hosting Dr. Catherine Lawal, and she'll be talking about how to sustain inclusive politics and mobilizing, retaining underrepresented groups in politics. Without further ado, Isolde, oh yes, I'm very, very impolite of me. Isolde, I haven't done the introduction for you yet. My apologies. Isolde is a PhD candidate in political science at the London School of Economics. Her supervisors are Sarah Holbold and friend of Campaign Lab, Florian Flues. Her research examines the responses to populist and radical right actors in Western democracies and whether they work or not. To do this, she uses advanced qualitative methods like estimating causal effects from large-scale observational data, setting up experiments with simulated social media posts, and harnessing LLMs to get the most out of contextual data. Very interesting area. Without further ado, Isolde, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Douglas. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm really excited to share these findings from my newest project with all of you. This project is called Trump by AI, Effects of Fact-Checking Interventions on Online Engagement with Political Misinformation Among Republicans. And I collected data for this just in September, so this is super fresh. And I'm really excited to first present this and then also to engage with your questions and also your input, because I want to make this as relevant as possible for practitioners and the general public. Okay, let's dive right in. Perfect. So what has been happening in the US? In January 2025, Donald Trump was inaugurated as 47th President of the United States. And just a few days earlier, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, announced that Meta on all of its platforms in the US would switch from independent fact checkers to community notes as a system to fact check misinformation and misleading information across its platforms. So that includes, for example, Instagram and Facebook. This is an example of what community notes can look like. You would have people adding a community note, and this community note would provide context for the post in question. And since Trump's inauguration, what's been happening is that the Trump administration has been using misinformation to advance its policy goals and to justify its policy agenda. And this is an example of some of the misinformation that's been advanced and shared by Donald Trump himself. So this is a post he reposted on Truth Social, his own social media platform, claiming that there is no Joe Biden and that Joe Biden was executed in 2020 and replaced by a robotic clone. So this is the kind of misinformation we're dealing with. And that led me to my motivation and my question here. In this context, we know that Trump supporters are the key target group of much of the administration's current social media efforts. And we also know that they are much more likely to share links to low-quality sources. So that makes Republicans, in this context, a key group to study. And taking into account the switch from independent fact-checkers to community notes, I asked myself, what is the effect of different fact-checking interventions on Republican social media engagement with co-partisan political misinformation? So we're not just talking about any misinformation they might encounter online, but really the ones that are advancing Trump's and Republican policy goals right now. Okay. So first, I want to give a general overview of the effects of fact-checking. What do we know about fact-checking? We know that it generally works in correcting people's beliefs in a range of misinformation. So most of this research is on health misinformation, but there's also a range of literature looking at political misinformation. And fact-checking also works here. So fact-checking helps people adjust their beliefs in a range of political misinformation. One key mechanism that researchers find is that it's really important how credible a respondent finds a fact checker, right? If you think that a fact checker is credible, you're more likely to trust the fact checking information they put out. So it's really important who fact checks. Who fact checks matters. And what we know about the general US population is that fact-checking organizations, crowdsourcing, so community notes, and AI perform equally well among the general US population. However, if we think about the general US population and then Republicans, we know that Republicans are very different on a range of socio-demographic characteristics. So what I wanted to look at is how do Republicans judge these different interventions, because they're very likely to judge credibility of fact checkers differently to the general population. Okay, so when we look at Republicans and fact checking, there is also a range of research on that. We can see that independent fact checkers generally are much more likely to flag misinformation shared by pro-Trump and conservative Twitter accounts. And this is not because independent fact checkers are biased in and of themselves, but because a lot more misinformation is shared by those accounts. However, it leads to this opinion among 70% of Republicans that fact checkers tend to favor one side. So what we can expect here is that they would rate the credibility of independent fact checkers relatively low, right? Because they would think that they tend to favor one side. Okay, when we go to community notes, I expect that they might be less likely to be perceived as partisan by fact checkers, because community notes work in a way where a range of users with very different ideological positions and who hold a range of political beliefs need to agree on flagging a post as misinformation. So Republicans who encounter a community notes label will know that other Republicans will have agreed on putting that label on a post. So here, community notes might be perceived as less partisan. And then comparing this to AI, there's one study that compares the efficacy of independent fact checkers in AI among Republicans. And it firstly finds that independent fact checkers are more effective at reducing sharing intent, and that AI even increases sharing intent. This is crucial. So AI doesn't even have a neutral or no effect. It has this positive effect on increasing sharing intent of misinformation. Okay. When we think then of effective fact checking, before I go into my expectations, we need to think of two goals, because generally when we think of the goal of fact checking is we want to reduce belief in or engagement with false information, right? But what we also need to check is that it doesn't indiscriminately just reduce belief in or engagement with all information that is fact-checked. So we need to make sure that it also increases discernment between true and false information. This means we need to not just check the effect on false, but also true information. And this is also what I'm doing in the study. Okay, here are my expectations. I firstly expect to find that fact-checking labels on false posts reduce engagement with these posts. I then expect to find that community notes are more effective than independent fact-checkers and AI at doing so, that independent fact-checkers are more effective than AI at doing so, and that AI is logically then less effective than either of these. Why do I want to look at AI again? AI in the last 5 years, the study was from 2020, AI in the last 5 years has become a crucial part of everyday experiences of people in the US, right? Even when you don't seek out AI information and input, when you go into your search engine and you look for information, there will often be likely an AI summary. So AI has become this everyday experience for people. And I think it's important to revisit these findings. Also because it offers a lot of potential for fact-checking. And then lastly, my hypothesis 5 is that fact-checking labels on false and true posts increase discernment. And this again goes back to our two goals to firstly reduce engagement with false posts and then increase discernment between true and false posts. And hypothesis 5 is also an important check for me to see that the fact-checking interventions I'm using are really working and are not just putting people off engaging with any fact-checked information, whether it's true or false. Okay. I then needed to think about my empirical strategy to best answer these questions. And what we want to keep in mind when we design these kinds of research studies is that we want ideally both full control over the treatment, right? And we want natural user behavior. And I was thinking about the different options out there. With a traditional survey experiment, you get full control over the treatment, right? Because you can randomize who is exposed to treatment and when, and that will make the treatment independent of other covariates that it might be correlated with in the real world. So a traditional survey experiment would give me full control over the treatment. However, at the same time, it would not really lead to natural user behavior because, as we saw earlier, a lot of the questions are around asking people about their sharing intent on, for example, a scale of 1 to 10, instead of actually observing how they naturally and intuitively engage or choose not to engage with a post. Okay, when we want natural user behavior, we then often turn to observational data. However, as I just said, we don't really have full control over the treatment because, as we learned earlier, independent fact checkers, for example, do not randomly fact check across ideological posts. What they do is they will be more likely to target certain posts, such as right-wing misinformation. And similarly, community notes, for example, will not just randomly fact check any post. So with observational data, we would have natural user behavior, but not full control over the treatment. So what I landed on was a simulated social media experiment. Here, I have full control over the treatment because I have full control over the simulated social media space. And I also get as close as possible, in this case, to natural user behavior. And I'm going to go into the empirical strategy now. Okay. First, I needed participants for my study. So I recruited 1,450 Republican respondents on Prolific. I originally wanted to recruit 2,000, but at some point I ran out of money. And what happened was that people really engaged much more deeply with the posts I exposed them to. So I originally thought that they would take around 6 minutes. As I heard from other researchers who did comparable studies, that people would spend around 10 seconds on a post. But people took nearly twice as long, so 11 minutes. And I also got a lot of messages from different participants who had thoughts on the research design, had thoughts on the posts, and assured me that they had engaged deeply. So that was great. And we ended up with 1,450 participants. I pre-screened them by partisanship. So all of them are Republicans, and they are 18 to 100 years old, just to make sure that we're only including adults. I also use screeners for various social demographic characteristics, which I'm going to show you in just a second. This data collection ran from the 8th to the 16th of September 2025 and was also approved by the LSE Ethics Board. Okay, and here are the sample characteristics. As we can see, okay, in the first column with the sample numbers, we can see the raw numbers of, for example, ethnicity, age, sex, and education. We can then also see the percentages of the sample. And we can see what I took from Pew Research Center, the population benchmarks from the Republican population in the US. So how does my sample compare to the population? What we can see here is that my sample is not really representative of the Republican population. That's okay. I'm going to account for that later. But for example, white respondents are slightly oversampled. We have a lot more younger respondents, more women, and more people with a bachelor's degree or higher. But I'm using certain robustness checks to account for that. Okay. So once I had recruited the participants, they would then be led to the consent form. And after they consented to participating in the survey experiment, I then asked them to attention checks. This is an example of one of the attention checks. Do you go to space every weekend in your personal rocket? When they said that they do, we excluded them. Because they either, they didn't pay enough attention. But these were really simple, just to check that participants had this baseline level of attention. I then gave them very brief instructions, and I tried to keep it as brief as possible, just to tell them how they could engage with the different posts. And I'll show you that in a second. And then I exposed them to these fictional social media posts. So 17 posts in total, 12 promoting incorrect, and 5 promoting correct statements by Trump. And after that, I gave them a debrief with forced exposure to fact checks for all Trump statements, because I really wanted to make sure that respondents at least had all of the information they needed to make an informed decision here. And so I forced them for 5 seconds each, at least, to look at the fact checks, again, for all Trump statements, although they were already previously exposed to most of those. Okay, and here's an example of how I built my posts. So on the left-hand side, we can see again the post I showed you in the beginning. So this post was reposted by Trump, claiming that Biden had been executed and replaced by a robotic clone. And then I built a fictional social media post with fictional profiles that I also built. And firstly, I embedded the quotes or the posts in this social media post. And I would always add a bit of the fictional poster's own words. So, for example, endorsed by President Trump on Truth Social, and then add the statement. So signaling that there was approval by the poster, and then just having the statement. I chose to use real Trump statements to make it as close as possible to real life and real information out there, and also to avoid exposing people to fake news. So all of this information is already out there, and they will be likely to be exposed to it anyways. And I wanted to avoid ethical pitfalls here too. So I embedded these quotes. I also randomized the order of these different quotes, just so this didn't have anything to do with the order in which they appear to participants. And then we're coming to the main treatment, whether there was a fact-checking label or not. Some posts would have these, some wouldn't. I then also randomized who would be the fact-checker. So it would be other users, that's for community notes, AI, or independent fact-checkers. I wouldn't change anything about the text, because we really just want to get at who the fact-checkers are and what impact that has on engagement with the post. I then also randomized these other things, like the fictional posters, when the post was posted, the number of reactions, and the number of reposts. I didn't randomize the number of comments because I did not add any fictional comments underneath the posts. And then, as I explained to the participants in the instructions, they were able to either react, repost, comment, or not do anything. And whenever they either at least reacted, reposted, or commented, I would count that as engagement with the post. If they would choose not to do any of that, I would count that as not engaging with the post. Here's some examples of these different posts. So we have some false statements with, for example, no context added, fact checkers and other users. And we have also this true statement. The true statements were quite hard to find for me, but I did find them. For example, in Trump's speech to Congress, and in AI fact-checking label. And as we can see, I would always add specific context for the posts and then randomize whether there would be a label and who would be the fact checker. I used the experiment builder Gorilla to build the social media environment. They have this pre-built social media component, which worked really well, and I was quite pleased with that. Great. Once I had collected all of my data, I used pre-registered expectations and specifications to first run my main model so that it was a linear OLS model with respondent level clustered standard errors to account for the fact that respondents encountered several posts. 95% confidence intervals were used to establish statistical significance. And for my main model, I excluded non-engagers because I expected some people to click through the posts quite quickly. And that is what happened. Other people also did not engage with the posts, but took longer and also messaged me saying, this would have been my normal behavior in the real world as well. I wouldn't engage with political posts. And so in robustness checks, I'm also including non-engagers to make sure that this choice didn't change anything about my findings. I also used weights in the robustness checks to make the sample representative. And I used an exploratory analysis controlling for covariates. Again, just another robustness checks to make sure that this isn't something about my sample or about specific specifications. Great. And here we're coming to the results. Firstly, we can see that fact-checking reduces engagement with false posts. There is a 1.8 percentage point decrease in engagement with false posts when there is a fact-checking label attached to the post, from 57.5% baseline engagement down to 55.7%. So that is a real statistical and substantively significant effect. But we don't just want to see a decrease in engagement with false posts. We also want to see this increased discernment between true and false posts. So that's what I tested next. And here we can see that fact-checking labels increase discernment between true and false posts. And so the green line here shows the slight increase. It's not statistically significant for engagement with true posts when there's a fact-checking label attached, but we can clearly see that this gap between engagement with false and true posts widens, right, when a fact-checking label is attached. Okay. Next, I looked at the kind of intervention, and we can see here that the kind of intervention, so who's doing the fact-checking, matters for engagement with misinformation. So first, on the left-hand side, we can see again our baseline probability of engaging with a post when there's no fact-checking label attached. That's 57.5%. And when we look at fact-checkers, we can see that actually there's no statistically significant decrease in engagement with misinformation when a fact-checker, an independent fact-checker, has done the fact-checking. That means that Republicans do not have a statistically significant reaction to fact-checkers, which means that they basically don't work, right, substantively. Other users and AI both do work, with other users showing a 2.1 percentage point decrease and AI showing a 2.3 percentage point decrease. And what we're interested in is then, does one intervention work better than the other, right? And we can see that in our main model, both other users and AI have a statistically significant difference to fact checkers. So they are statistically significantly more effective than independent fact checkers at decreasing engagement with misinformation. The difference between other users and AI is not statistically significant. Okay. Now we're coming to the robustness checks because, again, I wanted to make sure that these hold even if I use other model specifications. And here we're seeing on the left, in the left column, we're seeing the findings, the main findings from my main model. right? So labels on false posts reduce engagement, labels on false and true posts increase discernment, and AI and community notes are both more effective than independent fact checkers. When I included non-engagers, these were, I think, 16% of respondents did not engage with any post. When I included them in my sample, all of these effects hold. So the effects are roughly the same size, and they stay statistically significant. I then also used weights to basically try to make the sample as representative of the general Republican US population as possible. When I did that, most of the effects still held, other than community notes, who were not more effective than independent fact checkers anymore. And same when controlling for covariates. Here too, community notes ceased to be more effective than independent fact checkers. However, all of the other effects hold across models. So that means that for community nodes here, the statistically significant effects seem to be a function of the sample and do not seem to hold in both a representative Republican sample or when controlling for covariates. That's important to remember. So what does that mean for my expectations? Firstly, it means that yes, labels on false posts reduce engagement, and yes, labels on false and true posts increase discernment. However, I find limited evidence for the fact that community nodes are more effective than independent fact checkers. And I cannot confirm my expectations that AI is less effective than independent fact checkers or community nodes. I also asked myself the question, does the nature of reactions differ when a post was fact-checked? And we can see a slight statistically significant increase in the number of comments. So there seems to be some more engagement in the comments with a post when it's fact-checked. We can also see that comments are more likely to express positive or negative sentiment rather than a neutral tone. But we can't really see any effect on the kind of reactions. So for example, the likes or angry reactions, or the direction of the comment sentiment. So comments do not become more positive or more negative. They just become more likely to include a sentiment rather than being neutral. Okay, here are the key results, just to sum up. Fact-checking works on Republicans with co-partisan posts. This is super important. So these are posts that we would expect Republicans to engage with or to trust. And even here, fact-checking works. And substantively, AI is most effective for 3 reasons. We're seeing the largest decrease in engagement. We're seeing significantly more. We're seeing them being significantly more effective than independent fact checkers, and we can see that they are more consistently more effective than community nodes when comparing them to independent fact checkers. So what does that mean? This means that AI might offer new possibilities to not only fact check wider and faster, but also to convince key groups in the fight against misinformation. For now, the study only applies to Republicans in the US, so further research is needed here. We also next need to understand the mechanisms behind these effects. And further research should also look at the interactions between fact checkers and more nuanced labels, such like exaggerated, false, partially false, or needs context. These are very important because misinformation doesn't just mean that a post is true or false, but very often there's varying levels and different labels that can be attached to different kinds of misinformation. Lastly, these findings have important and useful implications for practitioners. And I'm really excited also to hear your feedback and suggestions on how to make this research as applicable and as useful for practitioners and the general public as possible. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isolde. That was great. I'm going to open it up for questions now. I'm going to let you take the questions, but I will sort of give voice to questions made in the messages. Questions to start us off. I do have a question to start us off, but I'm going to open up to everyone else first. Mark, I think you got a question.
Hello, Isolde, that was great. It's really, really interesting. Thanks very much for presenting your PhD, and I wish you well with it. One thing did strike me though. There was a graph, a few graphs back, where you showed that fact checking works. There were a couple of bars on it. Yeah, if you could spin back to it.
Yeah.
Stand by. Bit more. There we go. Oh, no, that wasn't. Go further. Go further back.
This
That's
one?
the boy.
Yeah.
That's the boy, yeah. We're talking in a very, very small proportion of a percentage point here. Does that have real world ramifications?
Yeah. So what we would normally expect in these studies is around -3 percentage point decrease, right?
Mhm.
And this is a bit smaller, but I also think that the label is quite diffuse still, right? So it's saying added context, and people really need to read the label. And when we think about the ramifications, where one person is a bit less likely to share this, and this goes from person to person, this has real world effects, right? And clearly, this needs to go hand in hand with other measures to counter misinformation. But when we think about how posts are being shared, I do believe that this can, especially if we use these labels a lot and people build trust in, for example, AI,
Mhm.
can have real world effects that are meaningful for countering misinformation and helping people understand a bit better, right, and engage a bit more thoughtfully with posts. It was interesting as well when I looked at the comments. Some people got a bit angry at posts being flagged as misinformation, but others also said, "Oh, that is really interesting. If that is really true, I need to read up on that." So I'm hoping that these people go online and maybe seek out some other sources and engage more thoughtfully with the information they're presented.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Nathan has left a comment. I suppose more comment than a question, but it's sort of worth getting your feedback on it. The findings are great news. A significant problem that has traditional fact checking is quite slow and arrives too late to counter disinformation. Very true. There was even a cartoon of Trump saying, I can lie faster than you can fact check." Any comments on this?
Yeah, thank you. I definitely agree. And there's really important studies on how especially community nodes and independent fact checkers are very often not capable of dealing with the vast range of misinformation out there, right? So I do think that AI has some really powerful potential here to fast check faster and wider. Personally, I think that this would probably go hand in hand with independent fact checkers, also checking already pre-filtered, for example, by AI material. And I think this can be framed in different ways to social media users, right? So you could, for example, call it AI-powered fact checking. I also think that there's really good initiatives. So, for example, the BBC and the New York Times and other newspapers on their online platforms now have these verify sites where people can go and get context, receive context for the information they're exposed to. But again, this is very slow and only caters to specific parts of the population who do seek out this misinformation, who do seek out this verification of information. So I do think that AI here, especially if applied at such a vast range, has real potential. Yeah, thank you for the comment.
Dan has also asked a question, which actually neatly aligns with the question I wanted to ask as well. So his comment is, I worry that AI is good at hallucinating or amplifying demonstrably false information. Were you able to control for this possibility? And then I want to sort of build on to his question and ask, what research or has any research been done on the impact of AI incorrectly fact-checking misinformation?
So I'm not, so this is still very early on. A lot of this has only looked at, what are the effects on people's trust and not further up the line. For example, how effective is AI at filtering this out? Again, going back to the point that AI is great in spotting general patterns and us also being able to program generative AI or large language models to spot certain trends. I think it can generally be very useful in filtering out posts that are likely to contain misinformation. But I also think that the human judgment by independent fact checkers remains a very powerful tool and then actually going into these posts and deciding also what kind of label needs to be attached to that. But yeah, sorry, just to add to that, AI also remains a black box, and this AI at the moment is still very much probability grounded. So I do think human fact checking remains at the core of distinguishing between true and false information and everything that falls in between.
That sort of highlights this trade-off between quantity versus quality when using AI fact checking. I mean, AI is great at the quantity, but not quite as high quality as human fact checkers.
Yes, exactly. And this research can't really tell us anything about how good or bad AI is at fact checking. Again, also because none of the texts were actually AI generated. I didn't look at how effective AI is. What I did do is look at these key groups that we need to convince, right? They are not being convinced by independent fact checkers. And we have this big problem with trust in independent institutions. If framing something as being fact-checked by AI, obviously without misleading the general public, can help convince some people, then that is great. But more research is needed. If we know that people trust AI, we still need to figure out how good AI really is at doing the fact-checking, especially when it comes to the quality of the fact-check. And also the bias that AI models hold in filtering out certain information, but maybe not targeting other information.
And I imagine there's also a trust issue over like which AI is doing the fact checking. So certain AIs might gain more trust over time in the eyes of the public in fact checking than other types of AIs.
Yes. This is also a snapshot, right? And as of now, a few companies have a lot of power over how their models are run. And I think there needs to be a lot more work into understanding how these models actually work, and potentially also building simpler but also more independent models that aren't as vulnerable to, for example, updates that completely change the judgment the model applies.
Thank you. And then we've got a question for Marie. Did you explore any effects of your sample's demographic characteristics? For example, did you test if the age or educational background were helpful to increase or reduce discernment in fact-checking level of truthfulness in a statement?
That's a really good question. And I haven't really done that yet. For now, I was looking at the general effects, but that's definitely a next step I want to take to look at what are some of the demographic characteristics that make fact-checking being successful more likely. Also because that might be able to tell us something about how this might travel to other populations. So that's a really good point and the next step I'm going to take. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else, by the way? Please raise your hand or let it be known in the chat.
Yeah, I'm also really interested in any suggestions you might have in taking this further, or what you would want to see out of the data I've collected. I do think this is very rich, and so for now, I think there's a lot more potential of what I could do with the data, for example, going more into the comments, looking who the commenters are. So anything here, any suggestions would be much appreciated.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for responses, I do also have another question. Do you have any knowledge of levels of misinformation in spaces outside of Republican supporters and the level to which they might believe or be influenced by AI fact checkers? So can we expect to see sort of similar, like to what extent is this misinformation culture unique to this particular group of people, and to what extent does it sort of bleed over into the rest of society and other groups?
So overall, I do think that Republicans right now are quite a unique group because you have a very altered social media space because both X and Meta have changed to community nodes right now. And you also have this very active push by an administration in a democracy to use misinformation and convince people of their policy agenda based on this misinformation. We're also seeing this trend, for example, with MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, where we're seeing the use of misinformation. And so, for example, the New York Times has had a really great report on how the White House administration has also been using deepfakes and graphics online to convince their supporters. I don't really think that in the US this goes beyond Republican voters and people they want on their side right now, also because the administration has really been demonizing anyone who's not Republican or a Trump voter. I'm not quite sure how this travels to other contexts. And I think this right now is really specific to the Republican group, right? So any further research would need to be done in the specific contexts for now. I do, however, think that there will probably be some parallels in other countries among voters who vote for radical right or populist parties and are similar in the demographics to the Republican sample that I've shown you. So, for example, differences in education, differences in age might certainly play a big role in how people respond to different fact-checking interventions.
Dan remarks, as an observation, having lived in the United States from 2014 until 2017, he saw direct parallels between American and British attitudes at a general level. Not everywhere, but enough for this to be applicable in this case. And then I also want to ask why you think misinformation might have extra resonance with this group of folks in particular.
I mean, again, I think that the US is a very specific context where you don't really have independent, relatively neutral or state-funded media like the BBC in the UK, but people are exposed to different media echo chambers. So they watch different TV channels, and then they go online and also are exposed to their echo chambers online. I also think that there's been this push from the Trump administration also in their first term where they already used misinformation. So this has been in the works for quite a few years. It's been used much more now. But I think that, and I agree with the previous comment, we can see some parallels, right? So the use of deepfakes, for example, has become much more regular in the UK. When we look at the anti-immigration riots, these were also fueled by deepfakes that were going around in the UK. So there seems to be an increased vulnerability by certain groups. I think this has several reasons. So for one, a lot of this material has become a lot more convincing in recent years. So it's much harder to distinguish between what is real and what is AI generated. We've also been seeing this building of this ecosystem and, for example, bots spreading misinformation online for years. And again, I do think that there are differences in some of the socioeconomic characteristics these groups hold. So, for example, slightly lower levels of education. There's a few countries who have implemented misinformation education into their curriculums and have seen success with that. So probably using education and political education, how to spot misinformation early on would hold great potential here. And also there's been research into basically pre-bunking misinformation. So instead of presenting someone with a post and then saying, oh, actually this post is true or false, teaching people before they are exposed to those posts how to spot irregularities that might hint towards AI-generated posts or misinformation.
Thank you. And unless someone's also got a question, I do have a question to build off of this one. What are the costs of this misinformation culture to the Republicans specifically as a group? I know there's been a fair bit of research and quite a lot of conversation about the cost to society of misinformation and disinformation. But what are the costs to the group that is actually employing it within themselves? Like, does it increase their chances of making bad decisions, of going awry? To what extent? That sort of stuff.
I think to some extent this is a normative question, right? So the ideological makeup of the Republican Party has been changing rapidly in recent years, and the party has really transformed into a radical right populist party with these authoritarian, nativist, and populist characteristics. And again, using misinformation to push a policy agenda is likely to not lead to better policy outcomes, right? We can already see measles outbreaks in the US that are based on a policy agenda based on misinformation. So this is really having real world impact on very often the people who voted for this agenda in the first place. And then also thinking about those voters, not only is it having these policy outcomes, it's also costing them in terms of the information they base their vote choice on, right? If a lot of the information they base their vote choice on is misinformation, they are not able to be independent thinkers and informed citizens making their electoral choices.
Also got I suppose another sort of AI related, more AI related question. What is the risk of the AI itself falling victim to misinformation and then misinforming people about misinformation statements? So there's this kind of like a feedback cycle that we're at risk of entering here with certain AIs.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think that goes back again to the AI as a black box. So we don't really know how AI makes its decisions. We can see that there is bias that is being adopted, bias that, for example, we as humans hold, or the information that is out there in the internet that AI is trained on holds. And there's also questions around what information AI has been trained on. A lot of this is, for example, different forums where anyone can post. And so there's been a recent effort by AI companies to also get access to, for example, research articles, right? And this more academic literature, because what AI right now is really good at is to, for example, write an email or give a general opinion or general tips, because that's what it's been trained on. So I think the next step will certainly be to try to get higher and higher quality information to train AI on. But certainly we need to be very critical of the information it's been trained on right now, and also how it presents that information. Sometimes when you work with ChatGPT, it will give you information that is clearly false. You might call it out on that. It will say, oh, yes, you're right, that is clearly false, and will give you the same or other misinformation again. So staying critical is key here. But yes, certainly misinformation and AI being trained on misinformation, that will not be engaged with critically by the AI, because it can't do that. It's going to give you an answer based on probabilities, based on the information it's been trained on.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Marie. Do you plan to explore if your findings change depending on the content of the posts? Can I imagine? I can imagine that especially the posts including false information have strong variance, and are based on content that in some way targets users' emotions, like fear or anger. So a comment there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I think that's really difficult because inherently at least between the true and the false posts, there's clear differences, right? So as I said, I had real trouble getting true posts that were somewhat equivalent to the false posts. And I used mostly economic statements that Trump made that were true. So for example, about the number of investments he had attracted to the US. And then the true posts, there's also a very limited range of topics that I used. This is mostly for ethical reasons. I did not want to expose participants to posts that would likely be distressing. So for example, posts about racial violence and misinformation and conspiracy theories around that have been pushed by the Trump administration. Similarly, I did not want to expose them to posts about Epstein, because again, that could be unethical, right? If you have vulnerable populations engaging with these posts. So that really restricted me in the range of topics that I could use. And a lot of these are also very hard to put into boxes. So the one thing I could do would be to maybe distinguish between clear conspiracy theories like Biden being executed and being replaced by a robotic clone, and then maybe just some false numbers around the economy, right? Or blaming Biden and the Biden administration for certain outcomes during the Trump administration era. So I think that's a really great step that I could take next. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion.
Then we've got time for one more question, after which I will launch a Q&A and encourage everyone to fill out to give feedback on these series, and then wrap this up. But one more question. Who wants to ask the last question? I feel I've been speaking way too much so far, so I don't want it to be myself. Takers. Well, any final thoughts or comments on things happening in the future and where you might wish. I know that you are asking for feedback from everyone about where you might want to take this further in the future, but any additional thoughts on your side of where you might want to take this research further, and also how you feel some of these insights might be useful to volunteer activists engaging people in the public arena.
Great, thank you. Yeah, first of all, if any further suggestions might come up, you're very welcome. I'm really looking forward to being contacted as well, so here are my contact details. But for the future, I think this is going to be hopefully a research note or a brief report. I think the big advantages of this research really were the research design and this very clear finding that holds across models. So AI works in targeting this key group that we need to target when we think about battling misinformation. I think for practitioners and activists, what's really interesting here is this use of the simulated social media environment. So this is something that I built without any programming. And you can build it very easily with components like the one I showed you. And it really allows you to test any expectations you might have and you might want to roll out in the field in a very controlled environment. In terms of the substantive findings, I think this really shows us that we need to look at what works in the real world and not just have normative judgments about the fact checkers we might want to see, for example, on Meta's platforms, but also the ones that we might need to see to most effectively combat engagement with misinformation. And I think this is what this research really shows, that unexpectedly, AI is most effective. It's important also to revisit these findings because, as we also now noted, and as we can see with the comparison to the study from 5 years ago, AI is changing rapidly. How people use AI and trust AI is changing rapidly. So we need to keep that in mind too. Yeah, but thank you so much for having me, and this was really fruitful. Thank you also for all the questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to launch a quick poll. Please let me know how you feel it went, and if you feel we should be doing more events like this. I'm going to so far no one has but we've got 2 participants. There's 16 of us, so a couple more that still need to be done. Got four folks. And in the meantime, I'm going to stop the recording.